The weight of the keys in my palm felt like victory. After 32 years as a librarian at Oak Ridge Public Library, after decades of careful saving, after 8 years of rebuilding my life post-divorce, these small brass house keys represented something I'd been told repeatedly I would never achieve. "You'll never afford a beach house on a librarian's salary," Harold had said, not cruelly, but with the patronizing certainty that had characterized our 23 years of marriage. Be realistic. Yet here I stood on the weathered porch of my very own Cape Cod cottage, the April breeze carrying salt and promise as it tousled my silver-gray bob. At 67, I, Dorothy Sullivan, had finally claimed my dream. A modest but charming 2-bedroom retreat with faded blue shutters and a panoramic view of the Atlantic that stole my breath each time I gazed upon it. The real estate agent had departed just moments ago, leaving me to savor my first moments of homeownership in solitude. I turned the key in the lock, feeling the satisfying click as the door swung open to reveal hardwood floors bathed in afternoon sunlight, the simple furnishings I had selected during previous visits already arranged by the local delivery service. "My home," I whispered, the words carrying a reverence that echoed in the quiet rooms. I moved slowly from space to space, trailing my fingers along countertops and door frames, mentally placing the books I had packed so carefully, envisioning mornings with coffee on the deck and evenings watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and rose. In the primary bedroom, a space just large enough for a queen bed and reading nook, I placed my overnight bag on the crisp white duvet. Through the window, I could see the narrow path that led down to my section of private beach, another marvel that still seemed surreal. My very own piece of shoreline, where no one could tell me I was being too quiet, reading too much, or failing to live a little, as Harold had so often complained. The beach house had been a dream born in my 20s, nurtured in secret during a marriage where my aspirations were secondary, and finally pursued with steely determination after the divorce. 8 years of working weekends at a local bookstore in addition to my library position. 8 years of no vacations, minimal dining out, and clothes purchased only when absolutely necessary. 8 years of Harold's dismissive comments when he heard about my continued saving efforts through our son Bradley. "Dorothy's still chasing that beach house fantasy?" he'd said to Bradley during a holiday dinner 3 years ago. "Some people never learn." The memory should have stung, but today it only deepened my satisfaction. I had learned, just not the lesson Harold intended. I had learned that my dreams were worth pursuing, that my modest librarian's salary could indeed accomplish remarkable things when paired with discipline and patience, and that the freedom of living life on my own terms was worth every sacrifice. I unpacked my small suitcase, hanging the few outfits I'd brought in the cedar closet. Tomorrow, Bradley and his wife Brooke would drive down from Boston to help move the rest of my belongings, primarily books and the personal items I couldn't bear to entrust to movers. I looked forward to showing my son the culmination of my years of planning, though I harbored mild apprehension about Brooke's reaction. Brooke Thompson Sullivan had entered our lives 6 years ago, sweeping Bradley off his feet with her vibrant personality and ambitious drive. As the marketing director for a luxury hospitality group, Brooke lived in a world of 5-star resorts and celebrity clients, a world where my simple tastes and quiet nature seemed hopelessly provincial. While never openly rude, Brooke had perfected the art of the subtle dismissal, the slight raise of a perfectly sculpted eyebrow when I mentioned my work at the library, the barely concealed impatience when I spoke too long about a book I loved, the theatrical sighs when family gatherings didn't adhere to her exacting standards. I tried to maintain perspective. Brooke made Bradley happy, and that mattered more than any discomfort I might feel around my daughter-in-law. Besides, with my new beach house located 2 hours from Boston, I could control the frequency and duration of family visits in a way that had been impossible in my small apartment just 20 minutes from their upscale condominium. The thought had barely formed when my phone rang. I fished it from my cardigan pocket, smiling at Bradley's name on the screen. "Hello, dear. I was just thinking about you," I answered, settling into the window seat that had been a non-negotiable feature in my house search. But it wasn't Bradley's voice that responded. "Dorothy, it's Brooke." The clipped, efficient tone was unmistakable. "Change of plans. We won't be coming tomorrow to help you move." "Oh." I tamped down my disappointment. "Is everything all right?" "Better than all right. Bradley landed the Westfield account, so we're celebrating. In fact, that's why I'm calling." Since you've got that beach house now, we're bringing the celebration to you. I've invited some of our friends and family to join us for the weekend. I blinked, struggling to process this information. This weekend? But I've only just arrived, and the house isn't really ready for guests yet. That's why I'm giving you advance notice, Brooke continued, as if I had expressed enthusiasm rather than reservation. Organize everything. I want rooms arrayed, food on the table, and space for 22 people. We're already on our way. 22 people? My voice rose in disbelief. Brooke, that's not possible. The house only has 2 bedrooms, and I haven't even bought groceries yet. A dismissive laugh crackled through the phone. Don't be dramatic, Dorothy. People can sleep on air mattresses or whatever, and there's got to be grocery store nearby. Bradley says your place has a deck, so we'll mostly be outside anyway. Just make it work. The presumption left me momentarily speechless. This was my first day in my new home, a sanctuary purchased with years of sacrifice, and Brooke was treating it like a hotel she'd booked for a corporate retreat. Look, I know this is short notice, Brooke continued, interpreting my silence as acquiescence, but this is important for Bradley's career. The Westfields will be there, along with the senior partners. It's a big deal. You wouldn't want to spoil this opportunity for your son, would you? And there it was, the subtle manipulation that had characterized so many of our interactions, the implication that my comfort and boundaries were less important than whatever Brooke deemed a priority, with Bradley's success used as the irrefutable justification. For a moment, I felt the familiar urge to accommodate, to apologize, to scramble to meet the impossible expectations being placed upon me. It was what I had done throughout my marriage to Harold, throughout Bradley's childhood when school administrators made unreasonable demands, throughout my career when patrons expected miracles with limited resources. But something stopped me this time. Perhaps it was the brass key still clutched in my left hand, the tangible proof of what I could accomplish when I valued my own desires. Perhaps it was the memory of Harold's dismissive predictions, so thoroughly disproven by the very floor beneath my feet. Or perhaps it was simply that, at 67, I, Dorothy Sullivan, had finally reached the limit of my accommodation. Of course, Brooke, I heard myself say, my voice calm and pleasant. I'll make sure everything is ready for your arrival. Perfect! We'll be there around noon tomorrow. Don't worry about anything fancy, just make sure it's clean and there's plenty to drink. As the call ended, I sat very still, watching the waves crash against the shore beyond my window. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the water in deepening shades of blue and gold. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my phone on the window seat beside me and took a deep breath. A lifetime of being the reliable one, the accommodating one, the one who could always be counted on to sacrifice my needs for others, rose up to meet the newfound resolve crystallizing within me. I'll make sure everything is ready, I repeated to the empty room, a smile spreading across my face that would have surprised anyone who knew only the agreeable librarian I had been for so many years. But not quite the way you're expecting, Brooke. I stood, smoothing my cardigan with hands that had spent decades shelving books, typing catalog entries, and quietly building a life on my own terms. Those same hands now reached for my phone again, not to call Bradley or to start ordering groceries for unwanted guests, but to set in motion a very different kind of preparation. I've always believed that working in a library for over 3 decades gives you certain skills that people tend to underestimate. The ability to research efficiently, to organize systematically, and most importantly, to understand people's needs, sometimes better than they understand them themselves. As I sat in my window seat watching the last light fade from the sky, I began to formulate my plan with the same methodical approach I'd used to catalog thousands of books throughout my career. 22 people, in my 2-bedroom cottage, with less than 24 hours' notice. The sheer audacity of it might have overwhelmed me in the past, might have sent me into a flurry of anxious preparation, desperately trying to accommodate the impossible. But not today. Not in this house that represented my independence, my perseverance, my refusal to accept Harold's limitations on my dreams. First, I needed information. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Bradley's number. My son answered on the 3rd ring, his voice elevated by the sound of highway traffic in the background. "Mom, did Brooke call you? Isn't it great news about the Westfield account?" "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, genuinely pleased for his success, despite the circumstances. "That's wonderful news. Brooke mentioned you're planning to celebrate at my house? I hope that's okay, he replied, with the first hint of uncertainty. It was Brooke's idea. She thought it would be perfect since you just got the keys and all. A kind of housewarming/celebration combo. Who exactly is coming, Bradley? I kept my tone casual, conversational. Oh, just some work people. The Westfields, of course. They're the clients. A couple of senior partners. Brooke's parents are driving up from New York. Her sister Tiffany and brother-in-law. Some friends from her side. I'm not even sure I know everyone, he admitted. And when did you and Brooke decide on this plan? I pressed gently. A hesitation. Well, it was kind of spontaneous. I closed the deal this morning and Brooke thought, so Brooke planned to bring 22 people to my new home without checking with me first. I stated it as a fact, not an accusation. Another pause. When you put it that way, look, Mom, I know it's short notice, but it's really important for my career. The Westfields are huge, and having them in a relaxed setting could mean future contracts. If it's too much trouble, it's no trouble at all, I interrupted smoothly. I'll take care of everything. I could practically hear his relief through the phone. You're the best, Mom. We should be there around noon. Love you. Love you too, Bradley. As I ended the call, I felt a familiar pang. My son, now 35, had always been caught between his desire to please others and his awareness of what was right. Growing up with Harold's dismissive attitude toward my ambitions had left its mark on Bradley. He'd learned early that keeping the peace often meant allowing stronger personalities to dictate terms. I had hoped his success in the business world would have changed that dynamic, but it seemed that with Brooke, he had fallen into old patterns. Well, perhaps it was time for both of us to break those patterns. I opened my laptop and began my research. First, I looked up the Thompson family, Brooke's parents, Richard and Elaine, who owned a successful chain of high-end furniture stores in the tri-state area. Notoriously particular, according to several society page mentions I found, with Elaine serving on multiple charity boards where she was known for her exacting standards. Then, Tiffany Thompson Green and her husband Patrick, who ran a boutique public relations firm in Manhattan, specializing in crisis management for celebrities. Next, I searched for information on the Westfields. Jonathan and Diana Westfield, third-generation owners of Westfield Properties, a luxury real estate development company expanding aggressively into hospitality. Their social media showed a couple in their 50s with expensive tastes and a penchant for exclusivity. Private clubs, invitation-only events, carefully curated experiences. The senior partners at Bradley's firm were easier. I'd met them at various company functions over the years. Traditional men with traditional expectations who valued appearances and connections above all else. By 11 p.m., I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on my unwanted guests. Now it was time to implement phase 1 of my plan. First, I called Meredith Hansen, my oldest friend who had retired to Wellfleet 3 years earlier. One of the reasons I'd chosen this particular stretch of Cape Cod for my own retirement. Meredith, it's Dorothy. I hope I'm not calling too late. Dot! Not at all. Are you finally at the beach house? How is it? It's perfect. Or it was until about an hour ago. I explained the situation, not bothering to hide my frustration. Meredith's indignation on my behalf was comforting. The nerve! After everything you went through to get this place, what are you going to do? That's why I'm calling. I need your help. By midnight, I had made 7 calls, sent 12 emails, and compiled a detailed schedule. My years organizing library fundraisers, community events, and children's reading programs had given me a network of local contacts that would prove invaluable now. People often underestimated librarians, assuming our expertise was limited to books and shushing. They failed to recognize that we were essentially community hubs, information specialists, and masters of quiet influence. I slept surprisingly well that night, my dreams untroubled by the confrontation to come. When I woke at 6 a.m., I felt more refreshed and focused than I had in years. After a quick breakfast, I drove to the small town center to set my plans in motion. My first stop was Greta's Market, the only grocery store within 15 miles. The owner, Greta Svensson, had been one of my first calls the night before. "Dorothy," she greeted me warmly as I entered. "Everything's arranged, just as we discussed." "Thank you, Greta. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this." "Are you kidding? After what you did for my grandson's college applications? This is nothing." I smiled, remembering the hours I'd spent helping her grandson navigate scholarship opportunities, edit his essays, and prepare for interviews. The time investment had paid off. He was now in his second year at MIT on a full scholarship. Still, I insist on paying the reservation fee. Absolutely not, she said firmly. Consider it a housewarming gift. My next stop was Coastal Rentals, where Marshall Turner greeted me with equal enthusiasm. Mrs. Sullivan, welcome to the neighborhood. Meredith called ahead. We've got everything set aside for you. Including the special requests, I confirmed. Especially those, he grinned. Haven't had this much fun since we pranked the summer tourists with the fake shark sighting last year. By 10 a.m., I had visited 7 businesses, confirmed arrangements with local service providers, and returned home to make final preparations. As I placed fresh flowers on the small dining table and made up the guest bedroom with my best linens, I hummed to myself, an old habit from my library days when preparing for special events. At 11:30 a.m., I changed into a simple blue sundress, applied a touch of lipstick, and stepped onto my porch to await my guests. The ocean breeze ruffled my hair as I stood watching the road, hands clasped calmly before me, the very picture of a welcoming hostess. Only I knew what awaited Brooke and her 21 guests. Only I understood that sometimes the quietest person in the room can orchestrate the loudest lesson. At precisely 11:55 a.m., a caravan of luxury vehicles appeared on the horizon, making their way down the narrow coastal road toward my little blue cottage. I smiled, smoothing my dress with steady hands. Let the education begin, I whispered to myself as the first car pulled into my driveway. I've always believed that the most effective lessons are those delivered with a smile. As a librarian, I had perfected the art of maintaining a pleasant demeanor while enforcing necessary boundaries, whether dealing with rowdy teenagers, entitled patrons, or board members who thought budget constraints were merely suggestions. That practiced smile was firmly in place as the first vehicle, a gleaming black Range Rover, pulled into my modest gravel driveway. Brooke emerged from the passenger side, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, phone in hand, already speaking before her feet touched the ground. "Dorothy, there you are. The navigation kept trying to send us to the wrong place. This is so quaint." Her gaze swept over my cottage with the barely concealed assessment I'd grown accustomed to. Smaller than I expected from Bradley's description, my son exited the driver's side, looking slightly harried but genuinely pleased to see me. "Mom, the place looks great!" He embraced me warmly, then stepped back. "Sorry about the last-minute change of plans." "Not at all," I replied, returning his hug. "I'm so proud of your accomplishment with the Westfield account. Of course we should celebrate." 2 more vehicles pulled in behind them, a sleek Mercedes sedan and an Audi SUV, disgorging a collection of well-dressed people who stood blinking in the bright coastal sunlight, their expressions ranging from curious to faintly dismayed as they surveyed their surroundings. "Everyone, this is Bradley's mother, Dorothy," Brooke announced, gesturing toward me with the casual introduction that always made me feel like an afterthought. "Dorothy, these are the Westfields, Jonathan and Diana." A distinguished couple in their 50s approached, extending manicured hands. Jonathan Westfield had the confident bearing of old money, while Diana's smile held the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to social niceties. "Lovely to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan," Diana said. "What a charming cottage." "Please, call me Dorothy," I replied. "And thank you. It's my dream home. Just purchased it yesterday, in fact." "Yesterday?" Diana's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "And you're already hosting? How accommodating of you." I just smiled in response, noting the slight emphasis on accommodating, as if it were a character flaw rather than a virtue. Brooke continued the introductions rapidly, barely pausing for proper acknowledgments. Her parents, Richard and Elaine Thompson, her sister Tiffany and brother-in-law Patrick, 3 senior partners from Bradley's firm and their wives, 2 couples introduced as dear friends, and finally, a young woman named Alexa, whom Brooke described as her absolute lifesaver of an assistant. 22 people in total, just as Brooke had declared, now stood in my small front yard, designer luggage at their feet, expectation written across their faces. "Well," I said brightly, "shall we go inside? I've prepared a light welcome refreshment." I led the procession through my front door, listening to the murmurs and whispers behind me. The main living area, while charming with its exposed beams and panoramic ocean views, was clearly not designed for 22 people. My carefully arranged furniture could comfortably seat perhaps 8. "It's so cozy," Elaine Thompson remarked, the word dripping with barely concealed disdain. "Where should we put our bags?" Jonathan Westfield asked, looking around for non-existent additional bedrooms. "I've made some special arrangements," I assured them, gesturing toward the dining table where I'd set out a pitcher of fresh lemonade and a plate of cookies. "But first, please, help yourselves to refreshments while I explain the accommodations." They clustered awkwardly around the table, some perching on the limited seating, others standing, as I poured lemonade into the mismatched collection of glasses I'd deliberately selected from the kitchen cabinets. "As you can see," I began pleasantly, "my cottage is rather intimate. With only 2 bedrooms, I knew I wouldn't be able to accommodate everyone comfortably here." Brooke's head snapped up, her expression sharpening. "But I told you." "So," I continued smoothly, "I've arranged alternative accommodations for most of you at various locations around town." A confused murmur rippled through the group. Brooke's face flushed with the first signs of alarm. "Dorothy, that wasn't necessary," she said tersely. "We discussed this. Everyone was prepared to make do here." "I couldn't possibly allow that," I replied, my voice warm with concern. "Not when there are so many lovely options nearby. Though I should mention, this being the start of the spring season, availability was somewhat limited on such short notice." I retrieved a stack of envelopes from a side table and began distributing them. "I've prepared individual accommodation details for each of you." Diana Westfield opened her envelope first, her expression shifting from confusion to dismay. "The Harborview Motel? On Route 6? It's the only place that had a vacancy for tonight," I explained apologetically. "The reviews mentioned that the traffic noise tapers off around midnight, and the musty smell is only noticeable in the bathroom." Jonathan Westfield's envelope contained a reservation for the Seabreeze Inn, a modest bed and breakfast nearly 5 miles away. "They only had 1 room available," I told him, "so Diana will need to take the motel. I do hope that's not too inconvenient." As each envelope was opened, the reactions grew increasingly strained. The Thompson parents were assigned to separate establishments in neighboring towns. Tiffany and Patrick discovered they would be staying at a campground with a rental tent already secured for them. "The manager assured me the raccoon problem has been largely resolved," I added helpfully. The senior partners and their wives received bookings at a variety of establishments, each less appealing than the last. A hostel with shared bathrooms, a fisherman's cottage described as rustic but functional, and a room above the local bait shop. "There must be some mistake," Bradley said, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Surely there are better options in the area. On a spring weekend with less than 24 hours notice?" I shook my head sadly. "I called everywhere within 30 miles. These were the only vacancies available. The Cape gets quite busy this time of year with the whale watching season beginning." Brooke had turned an interesting shade of pink. "This is unacceptable," she hissed at me, dropping all pretense of politeness. "The Westfields cannot stay at a roadside motel. Do you have any idea how important they are?" "I'm sure they're lovely people regardless of where they sleep," I replied innocently. "That's not what I—" She stopped herself, visibly struggling to maintain composure in front of her guests. "What about here? Surely some of us can stay here." "Oh, of course," I agreed readily. "I've prepared my guest room for you and Bradley, and the Thompson parents can have my room. I'll take the sofa. The rest, I'm afraid, will need to use the accommodations I've arranged." Diana Westfield cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps we should consider returning to Boston. It's only a 2-hour drive after all." "But we've planned dinner at the Coastal Club," Brooke protested. "It's the most exclusive restaurant in the area. I've been on the waiting list for months." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "About that," I said, "I took the liberty of confirming your reservation this morning. It seems there was some confusion. They have no record of a booking under your name." "That's impossible," Brooke snapped. "Check again. Thompson Sullivan, party of 22, 7 p.m. "I spoke with the manager directly," I explained. "Marcel is an old friend. He used to visit the library for our French literature discussions. He checked thoroughly and found nothing. Unfortunately, they're fully booked tonight for a private event." The collective dismay was palpable. Brooke's carefully orchestrated impression of effortless luxury and influence was crumbling before her very eyes. "However," I continued brightly, "I did manage to secure a group reservation at the Salty Dog down by the harbor. It's not quite the Coastal Club, but they serve the most wonderful fresh catch, and their picnic tables have the most charming view of the fishing boats. Picnic tables? Elaine Thompson repeated faintly. Communal seating, I confirmed. Very rustic and authentic. I thought it might be a refreshing change from the formal dining you're all accustomed to. Bradley looked utterly bewildered, caught between Brooke's mounting fury and my serene smile. The Westfields were exchanging meaningful glances, while Brooke's assistant was frantically typing on her phone, presumably searching for alternative arrangements. Now, I said cheerfully, who would like a tour of the beach? The tide pools are particularly interesting this time of day. As the group stood in stunned silence, I caught a flicker of something unexpected on Diana Westfield's face. Not anger or disappointment, but the faintest trace of amused respect. Our eyes met briefly, and I could have sworn she gave me the slightest of nods before turning to murmur something to her husband. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. The seeds of discomfort had been planted. Now it was time to let them grow. The afternoon unfolded exactly as I had orchestrated, each carefully planned inconvenience building upon the last-like chapters in a meticulously crafted novel. I led my unwanted guests down the narrow path to my stretch of beach, maintaining a running commentary about the local wildlife and tidal patterns that I knew would bore them to tears. Years of conducting educational tours for restless schoolchildren had taught me precisely how to sound enthusiastic while delivering information no one had asked for. The horseshoe crab is actually more closely related to spiders than to true crabs, I explained cheerfully as we reached the shoreline, pointing to a specimen that had washed up. They've remained virtually unchanged for 450 million years. Isn't that fascinating? Tiffany Thompson Green visibly recoiled, her designer sandals sinking into the wet sand. Is it dead? Oh no, just resting, I assured her, knowing full well how this would land. They often appear motionless for hours. Would you like to hold it? They're quite harmless. The look of horror that crossed her face was worth every penny I'd paid the local marine biology student to place the harmless creature in that exact spot. I think I'll pass, she muttered, backing away. The Westfields made a valiant effort to appear interested in the coastal ecosystem, though Diana's white linen pants were already showing spots of sand, and Jonathan kept checking his watch with increasing frequency. Bradley's colleagues from the firm stood awkwardly in a cluster, clearly wishing they were anywhere else, while Brooke paced the shoreline, phone pressed to her ear, presumably trying to salvage her carefully planned weekend. The cell reception can be quite spotty down here, I called out helpfully as she grew increasingly agitated. Something about the cliffs interfering with the signal. You might have better luck up by the road, though the only reliable spot is near the sewage treatment facility, about a mile north. Brooke shot me a look that could have curdled milk. After 30 minutes of my impromptu nature lecture, I suggested we return to the house for an early afternoon tea. The relief on their faces was almost comical as they trudged back up the sandy path, their designer footwear and city clothing woefully inadequate for the terrain. Back at the cottage, I had arranged a spread that looked impressive at first glance, an elegant tea service laid out on my best tablecloth, with dainty sandwiches and scones artfully arranged on tiered platters. Please, help yourselves, I encouraged as they filed into the living room, many opting to stand rather than crowd onto the limited seating. The sandwiches are a local specialty. Diana Westfield was the first to take a delicate bite of a cucumber sandwich, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly as she chewed. What an interesting flavor, she managed after swallowing with visible effort. Seaweed butter, I explained enthusiastically. A wonderful local delicacy. And the scones contain dried dulse. That's a type of red algae harvested right off our shores. Tremendously nutritious, though I'll admit the texture takes some getting used to. One by one, they sampled the offerings, each face registering some version of dismay as they encountered the deliberately unusual flavors I had concocted. The tea itself, a specially ordered variety with notes of smoked fish, completed the sensory assault. Dorothy, Bradley said hesitantly after a cautious sip, this tea is unique. Isn't it wonderful? I beamed. The shop owner told me it's quite popular in certain remote Scandinavian fishing villages. I thought it would give you all an authentic taste of coastal living. By mid-afternoon, a subtle but unmistakable shift had occurred among the group. The initial excitement of their impromptu celebration had given way to a dawning realization that this weekend would not be the sophisticated networking opportunity Brooke had promised. The Westfields were huddled in quiet conversation by the window. Brooke's parents had disappeared to check out the accommodations, their expressions grim as they departed. The various friends and colleagues had formed small clusters, their voices low, but their discomfort evident. Brooke cornered me in the kitchen as I prepared another pot of the malodorous tea. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she hissed, abandoning all pretense of civility. I arranged my features into an expression of innocent confusion. "I'm being a good hostess, of course. Is something wrong?" "Everything is wrong," she snapped, keeping her voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to the other room. "The sleeping arrangements, the reservation mix-up, and what in God's name is in those sandwiches? The Westfields are talking about leaving. Bradley's boss looks like he swallowed a lemon, and my parents are furious." "I've done my very best with the limited notice I was given," I replied calmly. 22 people is quite a lot to accommodate when one has owned a house for less than 24 hours. This isn't about the notice. You're doing this deliberately. Her eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. "You're sabotaging my event." I met her gaze steadily, my expression unchanged. "I'm simply working with what I have, Brooke, just as I've always done when faced with other people's expectations." Our standoff was interrupted by Bradley, who entered the kitchen looking concerned. "Everything okay in here?" "Fine," Brooke and I answered simultaneously. "The Westfields are asking about dinner arrangements," he said. "Apparently there's some confusion about the reservation." "I told Dorothy," Brooke began, her voice tight with controlled fury, "that I had a reservation at the Coastal Club. Somehow, it's mysteriously disappeared." "Such a shame," I agreed sympathetically. "But the Salty Dog will be a delightful alternative, though I should mention they don't serve alcohol. The owner has strong religious convictions, and I believe tonight is their famous pickled herring buffet." Bradley's face fell. "Pickled herring?" "A local tradition," I confirmed, knowing full well that the Salty Dog was actually renowned for its lobster rolls and had a full bar. My friend Meredith's husband had owned it for 20 years before passing it to their son, who had been more than happy to play along with my scheme. "I need some air," Brooke declared, stalking out of the kitchen. Bradley watched her go, then turned to me with a searching look. "Mom, what's really going on? This isn't like you." I considered my son's troubled expression, weighing my next words carefully. Bradley had always been caught in the middle, between Harold and me during our marriage, and now between Brooke and me. He was a peacekeeper by nature, uncomfortable with conflict and eager to smooth ruffled feathers. "What's going on?" I said gently. "Is that I'm finally allowing people to experience the consequences of their actions, including you, sweetheart." His brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means that you allowed Brooke to invite 22 people to my home without asking me first. It means that neither of you considered what that might mean for me. On my first day in the house, I've worked 8 years to afford. It means that you assumed, as people have assumed throughout my life, that I would simply accommodate whatever was asked of me, regardless of how unreasonable." Understanding dawned slowly on his face, followed by the flush of shame I had anticipated. "Mom, You don't need to apologize," I interrupted. "Not yet. First, I want you to go out there and really look at what's happening. See how quickly Brooke's carefully orchestrated impression falls apart when things don't go precisely as she planned. Notice who shows grace under pressure and who doesn't. Observe how people treat service workers when they're disappointed. Then we'll talk." He nodded slowly, a thoughtfulness in his eyes that reminded me of the sensitive boy he had been before the corporate world, and his marriage to Brooke had smoothed away his edges. As he left the kitchen, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The weekend was young, and I had many more lessons planned for my unwanted guests. By Sunday, they would understand exactly who Dorothy Sullivan was, not just Bradley's accommodating mother or the quiet librarian who could be safely overlooked, but a woman who had earned her place by the sea and would defend it with weapons they never saw coming. I picked up the tray of fresh seaweed sandwiches and followed my son into the living room, my smile serene and my resolve unshaken. As evening approached, my unwanted guests dispersed to check into their various accommodations, each departure marked by thinly veiled displeasure and awkward attempts at gratitude. I stood on my porch, waving cheerfully as luxury vehicles pulled away down the gravel drive, their occupants already on phones trying to salvage their weekend plans. "We'll meet at the Salty Dog at 7, I called after them. "Don't forget to bring cash. They don't accept credit cards. Only Bradley and Brooke remained behind, along with the Westfields, who had insisted on staying to freshen up before dinner, a transparent attempt to discuss their options privately. The moment the last car disappeared from view, Brooke rounded on me, her professional composure finally cracking. "I don't know what game you're playing, Dorothy, but you're embarrassing Bradley in front of the most important clients of his career." I tilted my head slightly, regarding her with the calm assessment I'd perfected during decades of dealing with library patrons who believed their late fees were somehow my personal vendetta against them. Am I? Or did you embarrass him by promising an experience you couldn't possibly deliver, based on presumptions about my home and my willingness to accommodate your plans? Bradley stood between us, his discomfort palpable. "Can we please not do this now? The Westfields are inside." "The Westfields," I said quietly, "are currently reconsidering whether they want to do business with a firm whose representatives would treat family this way. You might want to think about that, Bradley." I left them on the porch, stepping back into my cottage where Diana and Jonathan Westfield were engaged in hushed conversation by the window. They fell silent as I entered, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. "Mr. and Mrs. Westfield," I greeted them warmly. "Can I offer you something to drink before dinner? I have a lovely local cranberry wine that doesn't taste at all like the seaweed tea, I promise." To my surprise, Diana Westfield laughed, a genuine sound that softened her carefully maintained appearance of polished perfection. "I'd love some, Mrs. Sullivan. And please, call me Diana. Only if you'll call me Dorothy." I poured 3 glasses of the ruby-colored wine, handing them around with the practiced ease of someone who had served refreshments at countless library functions. Jonathan accepted his with a nod that seemed to hold a new measure of respect. "Your home is charming," he said, gesturing to the simple but tasteful decor I had selected with such care. "How long have you been planning this purchase?" 8 years, I replied honestly. "Since my divorce. It took that long to save enough on a librarian's salary." Diana sipped her wine, her appraising gaze sweeping over me with new interest. "That's quite an accomplishment. Thank you. It means a great deal to me to have achieved it on my own." "I imagine it does," Jonathan nodded. "Independence is undervalued these days. Too many people expect things to be handed to them." The pointed remark hung in the air as Bradley and Brooke entered from the porch, their faces set in the strained smiles of people trying desperately to salvage a deteriorating situation. "Jonathan, Diana," Bradley began with forced joviality, "I hope you're comfortable. I was just telling Brooke that we should see about finding alternative accommodations for you. The Harborview Motel is really not up to standard." "Don't trouble yourself," Jonathan replied easily. "Diana and I have stayed in far worse places during our early years building the business. Sometimes the most memorable experiences come from unexpected circumstances." The look of confusion on Brooke's face was priceless. She had clearly expected the Westfields to be as outraged as she was by the turn of events. "But surely you'd prefer something more suitable," she pressed, shooting me a pointed glance. Diana set down her wine glass with a decisive click. "Actually, I find this whole situation rather refreshing. When was the last time any of us had a genuine experience, rather than the same carefully curated luxury we always insist upon? Jonathan and I were just saying that we've become too predictable in our later years." I hid my smile behind my own glass, watching as Brooke struggled to process this unexpected development. My research into the Westfields had revealed something Brooke had clearly missed. Beneath their wealth and status, they had built their empire from nothing. Starting with a single property, Jonathan had renovated himself while Diana worked 3 jobs to support them. They had earned their success through grit and determination, not inheritance or connections. In other words, they were far more like me than like Brooke. "Well," Brooke managed finally, "if you're sure, we should probably head to dinner soon. I've been trying to find an alternative to this Salty Dog place, but everything seems to be booked." "The Salty Dog sounds perfect," Diana declared. "I haven't had pickled herring since my grandmother made it when I was a child. Swedish heritage," she added with a wink in my direction. As we prepared to leave for dinner, I pulled Bradley aside briefly. "You might want to call ahead to the restaurant," I suggested quietly, "just to confirm the details." He frowned, but stepped onto the porch to make the call. When he returned, his expression was a mixture of confusion and relief. "They said they have our reservation, but there's no pickled herring buffet. They're known for their lobster and have a full bar." "How strange," I remarked innocently. Perhaps I was thinking of a different establishment. The drive to the harbor took 15 minutes, during which I sat quietly in the back seat of Bradley's Range Rover, listening as Brooke attempted to steer the conversation toward business, while the Westfields persistently returned to questions about my life, my career, and my new home. The Salty Dog was exactly as I knew it would be. A charming waterfront restaurant with weathered wood exterior and spectacular views of the harbor. Inside, rustic elegance replaced the picnic tables I had described, with white tablecloths, soft lighting, and the mouth-watering aroma of fresh seafood. "Dorothy," Meredith's son Jack greeted me with a warm embrace as we entered. "Your table is ready, best in the house, as promised." "You know the owner?" Brooke asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Dorothy's practically family," Jack assured her. "My father and she were great friends, and she helped me secure my small business loan when I took over. Without her letter of recommendation and assistance with the paperwork, I'd never have qualified." As we were seated at a prime table overlooking the water, I saw Bradley studying me with new eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. The rest of our party began to arrive, their relief evident as they discovered the restaurant was nothing like I had described. The Thompson parents looked particularly annoyed, having clearly spent the intervening hours complaining about the promised rustic experience. "This is unexpected," Elaine Thompson commented as she took her seat, casting a suspicious glance in my direction. "Isn't it?" I agreed pleasantly. "The Cape is full of surprises." Dinner proceeded with remarkable smoothness, the excellent food and flowing wine easing the earlier tensions. I spoke little, preferring to observe the shifting dynamics around the table. The Westfields engaged me in conversation whenever possible, asking thoughtful questions about my library career and the community I had served. Bradley's colleagues, taking their cue from the clients, showed a newfound interest in my perspectives. Even Tiffany and her husband occasionally directed remarks my way, though Brooke and her parents remained coolly distant. "A toast," Jonathan proposed, as dessert was served, raising his glass. "To Dorothy and her new home. May it bring you as much joy as our first property brought us." "To Dorothy," the table echoed, Bradley's voice carrying a note of confused pride that warmed my heart despite everything. I raised my own glass in acknowledgement, catching Brooke's gaze across the table. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes held a dawning comprehension. She was beginning to understand that she had severely underestimated her mother-in-law, and that the weekend was far from over. "Thank you all," I said simply. "I'm so looking forward to tomorrow's activities." The barely perceptible stiffening around the table told me they had received my message loud and clear. The first day had been merely the opening chapter in the education of my unwanted guests. The real lessons were yet to come. I awoke at dawn in my own bedroom, having insisted that Bradley and Brooke take the guest room while the Westfields returned to their respective accommodations. The Thompson parents had flatly refused my offer of my bedroom, opting instead to drive to a hotel in Hyannis, some 30 miles away. Their departure had been marked by tight smiles and thinly veiled accusations directed at Brooke for the miscommunication about the weekend arrangements. The house was still quiet as I padded to the kitchen in my slippers, savoring these moments of solitude before the day's events unfolded. I brewed a pot of coffee, real coffee this time, not the local specialty seaweed blend I had served yesterday, and carried my mug to the deck, overlooking the ocean. The morning light painted the water in shades of pink and gold, the gentle rhythm of waves against the shore, providing a soothing backdrop to my thoughts. This view, this moment of peaceful contemplation, was exactly what I had worked 8 years to achieve. No herald dismissing my dreams, no professional obligations pulling me away from simple pleasures, no need to accommodate anyone else's expectations. Just me, the ocean, and the life I had earned through patience and persistence. "It's beautiful," came a voice behind me. I turned to find Bradley standing in the doorway, his hair rumpled from sleep, looking younger and more vulnerable than his usual polished professional self. "It is," I agreed, gesturing for him to join me. "Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." He disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with a steaming mug to settle into the chair beside mine. For several minutes, we sat in companionable silence, watching the morning unfold across the water. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "Several, actually." I waited, giving him space to continue. I should never have let Brooke plan this weekend without consulting you first. It was presumptuous and disrespectful of your space. He took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. And I should have stood up for you when she started making demands. I got caught up in the excitement of the Westfield account and lost sight of what matters. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot to me. The thing is, Mom, he continued, his voice taking on a contemplative quality I hadn't heard from him in years. I didn't even recognize what was happening until I saw you with the Westfields last night. The way they responded to you, the respect in their voices. It made me realize how long it's been since I really saw you. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. We often stop seeing the people closest to us, Bradley. We think we know them so well that we stop paying attention to who they really are. Dad did that to you, didn't he? The question was gentle but direct. He stopped seeing you. Yes, I acknowledged, and eventually, I stopped trying to be seen. It was easier that way, less painful, until it wasn't. Bradley was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Is that why you're doing all this? The accommodations? The restaurant confusion? The seaweed tea? A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. That tea was truly terrible, by the way. I laughed softly. I know. I could barely keep a straight face watching everyone pretend to enjoy it. My amusement faded as I considered his question. And yes, that's part of it. I spent too many years being invisible, Bradley. I won't do it anymore. I get that, he nodded. But the elaborate setup? You must have made dozens of calls, arranged everything in advance. I did, I confirmed. Though it wasn't difficult. One of the advantages of being a librarian for 32 years is that you know everyone in town, and everyone owes you a favor or two. People tend to underestimate the influence of the woman who waived their late fees, helped their children with research projects, or wrote recommendation letters for their college applications. Bradley chuckled. Remind me never to get on your bad side. You're my son, I said softly. You could never truly be on my bad side, but you can disappoint me. And you did. His smile faded. I know. I'm sorry. I believe you are. But here's the question, Bradley. What happens next time Brooke makes plans that don't consider my feelings or boundaries? Will you speak up then? Or will you fall back into old patterns? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze returning to the horizon where the sun had now fully emerged. I don't know, he admitted finally. I want to say I'll do better, but it's complicated. Brooke she's not easy to stand up to. Few people worth loving are simple, I observed. The question is whether the relationship allows each person to be fully themselves, or whether one must constantly diminish to accommodate the other. Bradley looked at me sharply. Are you saying I should leave Brooke? No, I shook my head. I'm saying you should remember who you really are, beneath the corporate success and the strategic marriage. That thoughtful boy who stood up for the kids being bullied on the playground. That young man who chose to study literature before Harold convinced you business would be more practical. The son who called me every Sunday during college, not because you had to, but because you knew it would make me happy. Tears welled in his eyes, surprising us both. I haven't thought about that version of myself in a long time. He's still there, I assured him, just waiting for permission to exist again. The sliding door opened behind us, and Brooke appeared, already dressed in crisp white linen pants and a silk blouse, her hair and makeup immaculate, despite the early hour. There you are, she said to Bradley, her tone suggesting she'd been searching for hours rather than minutes. We need to figure out today's plan. I've been texting everyone and it's a disaster. Half the group wants to drive back to Boston after the accommodations fiasco, and the Westfields are being strangely non-committal. Bradley shot me a quick glance before turning to his wife. Maybe we should consider scaling back, Brooke. Mom just moved in yesterday, and 22 people is a lot to manage. Brooke's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. Scaling back isn't an option, Bradley. The Westfield contract depends on this weekend going smoothly. She turned her attention to me. Dorothy, I need to know what you've planned for today so I can work around it. I took a leisurely sip of my coffee, enjoying the momentary power shift. I've arranged a whale-watching expedition. The boat leaves at 10. Whale watching? Brooke repeated incredulously. The Westfields and your father's boss are not going whale watching. Actually, I said mildly, Jonathan Westfield seemed quite enthusiastic when I mentioned it last night. He said they'd never had the opportunity, despite visiting the Cape several times. Brooke's expression flickered between disbelief and calculation. Fine. What about lunch? A picnic on the boat. Very simple. Sandwiches, fruit, that sort of thing. And dinner? I thought everyone might appreciate a relaxed evening after a day on the water. Perhaps a bonfire on the beach? I could make my signature chili. The horror that crossed Brooke's face was almost comical. A bonfire? Chili? Dorothy, these are sophisticated people with refined tastes. They expect a certain level of authenticity, I suggested. Genuine experiences? Connection with their hosts? Because from my conversation with the Westfields last night, that seems to be exactly what they're seeking. Not another sterile corporate event disguised as a social gathering. Bradley cleared his throat, stepping into the tense silence between us. I think a bonfire sounds great, actually. Dad and I used to do them when I was a kid, remember, Mom? With the s'mores and the ghost stories? The unexpected support from my son caught Brooke off guard. Her mouth opened and closed once before she regained her composure. We'll discuss this later, she said tightly. I need to make some calls. As she retreated into the house, Bradley turned to me with a small, secret smile. Whale watching? Really? The tours are quite educational, I replied innocently, though I may have neglected to mention that April is known for particularly choppy waters, and the seasickness rate is nearly 60%. Bradley's laughter, free and genuine in a way I hadn't heard in years, carried across the water like a promise of things to come. Not resolution, not yet, but the beginning of a rebalancing that was long overdue. I raised my coffee mug in a small toast to myself and the day ahead. Phase 2 was about to begin. The Dolphin Fleet whale watch boat rocked gently against the pier as our group assembled for the morning excursion. I had arrived early to speak with Captain Mike, an old friend whose children had practically grown up in my library's reading corner. Everything set, Dorothy? He asked with a conspiratorial wink as I boarded. Perfect, Mike. Remember, educational but eventful. Got it. We'll give him the full Cape Cod experience. I took a position near the bow, watching as my reluctant guests arrived in small clusters. The Westfields appeared first, surprisingly enthusiastic and appropriately dressed in windbreakers and deck shoes. Bradley and Brooke followed, presenting a study in contrasts, my son looking relaxed in jeans and a sweater, while Brooke had somehow interpreted whale watching to mean nautical-themed photo shoot, complete with white capri pants, striped top, and immaculate deck shoes that had clearly never touched a boat deck. The remaining guests trickled in gradually, their numbers noticeably diminished from yesterday. Brooke's parents were conspicuously absent, as were several of the dear friends who had apparently opted to return to Boston. Bradley's colleagues from the firm had rallied, however, perhaps sensing that their professional futures depended on maintaining a united front with the Westfields. "Welcome aboard the Sea Star!" Captain Mike's voice boomed over the loudspeaker as the last stragglers settled onto the hard wooden benches. "We've got ideal conditions today for whale spotting. Strong winds, choppy seas, and a system moving in from the northeast that should make things nice and lively." I caught the flash of alarm that crossed several faces, particularly Brooke's, whose complexion had already taken on a slightly greenish tinge as the boat pulled away from the dock. "Before we head out to the deeper waters," Mike continued cheerfully, "I want to introduce our special guest naturalist for today's trip, Dr. Dorothy Sullivan." The surprise on my guests' faces was priceless as Mike gestured toward me with a flourish. "Many of you may know Dorothy as a retired librarian," he announced. "But what you might not know is that she's been a volunteer with the Cape Cod Marine Institute for over 15 years, specializing in cetacean behavior and conservation. She'll be providing expert commentary throughout our journey." This was, of course, a magnificent fabrication. While I had indeed volunteered occasionally with the Institute, my role had been limited to cataloging their research papers and organizing their annual fundraiser. But Mike had enthusiastically embraced my suggestion that we might enhance my credentials for today's excursion. Bradley was staring at me with a mixture of confusion and newfound respect, while Brooke's expression had shifted from seasickness to suspicion. "Thank you, Captain," I said, stepping forward with the confident air of someone about to deliver a university lecture. "I'd like to begin with some fascinating facts about the marine ecosystem of Cape Cod Bay, particularly focusing on the digestive processes of the North Atlantic right whale." For the next 20 minutes, as the boat pitched and rolled through increasingly choppy waters, I delivered a meticulously researched presentation on what might generously be described as the less appealing aspects of whale biology. My topics ranged from parasitic infestations to blubber decomposition, each described in vivid, scientific detail, calculated to unsettle even the strongest stomachs. By the time I concluded my initial lecture, 3 of Bradley's colleagues had retreated to the lower deck. Tiffany was clinging to the railing with a distinctly unwell expression, and Brooke had abandoned all pretense of composure, her face now unmistakably green. "And now," I announced cheerfully, "let's break for our picnic lunch before we reach the feeding grounds." The simple picnic I had arranged consisted of tuna salad sandwiches, extra mayonnaise left sitting just slightly too long in the morning sun, hard-boiled eggs with a particularly pungent dill sauce, and for dessert, bread pudding made with heavy cream and raisins, all served, of course, as the boat hit the roughest patch of water yet. "Dorothy," Diana Westfield approached me as I distributed the food with cheerful efficiency. "You are absolutely full of surprises. I had no idea you were a marine biologist as well as a librarian." The twinkle in her eye told me she wasn't fooled for a moment, but was thoroughly enjoying the performance nonetheless. "Oh, I contain multitudes," I replied with a conspiratorial smile, "much like the microbiome of the humpback whale, which reminds me of a fascinating study I read recently." As I launched into another detailed scientific discourse, I noticed Jonathan Westfield engaged in conversation with Bradley near the stern, both men seemingly oblivious to the nauseating effects of the rough seas that had now claimed at least half our party as victims. Brooke had disappeared entirely, presumably to the bathroom below deck. "Land ho!" Captain Mike announced over the loudspeaker. "Folks, we're approaching what we call the seasickness surrender point. That's where I normally turn the boat around if we haven't spotted any whales. But today we're in luck. There's a pod about 3 miles farther out, in the choppiest part of the bay. Who wants to continue?" A chorus of groans answered him, punctuated by Jonathan Westfield's enthusiastic, "Let's go for it." I caught Mike's eye and gave a subtle nod. Right on cue, the boat executed a particularly violent turn that sent several more guests lurching toward the railings. "Actually," I interjected with perfect timing, "perhaps we should consider heading back. Many of our party seem to be experiencing what marine scientists call mal de mer interactive syndrome, a fascinating condition where—" "Yes, let's head back." The desperate agreement came from multiple voices at once. "Well, if you insist," Captain Mike conceded with mock disappointment. "Though it's a shame to miss the feeding frenzy. The way those whales regurgitate partially digested krill to share among the pod is truly a sight to behold." The journey back to port was considerably faster than our outbound voyage, with Captain Mike taking pity on our seasick passengers by finding the smoothest possible route. As we approached the harbor, I found myself standing at the railing beside Diana Westfield, who had proven remarkably resilient throughout the excursion. "I must say, Dorothy," she commented quietly, "this has been the most entertaining business weekend I've experienced in years." "I'm glad someone's enjoying it," I replied with a small smile. "Oh, more than just me." She nodded toward her husband and Bradley, still deep in conversation at the stern. "Jonathan is absolutely delighted. He's been complaining for years about the artificial nature of these corporate social events. All those strained conversations over overpriced meals, everyone pretending to be having a marvelous time while secretly checking their watches." I watched her face carefully, trying to gauge her sincerity. "And this is better?" "Infinitely," she assured me. "It's real. Uncomfortable at times, yes, but authentic. Do you know what Jonathan said to me last night? That woman has backbone. I like doing business with people who have backbone." A warm sense of vindication spread through me, though I kept my expression neutral. "And what about you, Diana? What do you think of all this?" She considered the question, her gaze drifting to where Brooke had finally emerged from below deck, looking thoroughly miserable as she clung to a bench. "I think," she said carefully, "that your son married a woman very much like my husband's first wife, someone for whom appearances matter more than substance. That marriage lasted exactly 3 years. The implication hung between us, neither of us needing to state it explicitly. Relationship advice wasn't part of my librarian training," I demurred. Diana laughed. "No, but observing human nature certainly was. You see people clearly, Dorothy. It's a rare quality." As the boat docked and our bedraggled party disembarked, I caught Bradley's eye. The look he gave me was complex, part exasperation, part admiration, and something else I couldn't quite define. A recognition, perhaps, of the woman I truly was, not the mother he had taken for granted. Everyone, Brooke announced, attempting to rally her diminished forces despite her rumpled appearance. We'll reconvene at 6 for cocktails at Dorothy's, followed by dinner reservations at— Actually, Jonathan Westfield interrupted, Diana and I were rather looking forward to that beach bonfire Dorothy mentioned. Weren't we, dear? Diana nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. It's been ages since we've done anything so charmingly rustic. Brooke's face froze in a rictus of a smile. Bonfire. Yes, how charming. As the group dispersed to recover from the morning's adventure, I walked back to my cottage alone, savoring the salt air and the knowledge that my carefully orchestrated lessons were being absorbed, albeit painfully for some. The whale-watching expedition had accomplished exactly what I'd intended, separating those who could adapt and find joy in unexpected circumstances from those who were enslaved by their own rigid expectations. Tonight's bonfire would be the final test, the culmination of my weekend-long experiment in gentle revenge and necessary education. As I reached my front porch, I paused to look out at the ocean that was now mine to enjoy every day. Just one more act to go, I murmured to myself, unlocking the door to prepare for the evening ahead. The afternoon passed in peaceful solitude as I prepared for the evening's bonfire. I chopped vegetables for my chili, assembled ingredients for s'mores, and gathered blankets and cushions to make the beach seating comfortable. These simple, practical tasks centered me, reminding me of who I was beneath the elaborate revenge plot I'd been orchestrating. Just Dorothy Sullivan, retired librarian, finally living her coastal dream. Around 4 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Bradley standing alone on the porch, his expression thoughtful. Need help with anything? He offered, hands shoved in his pockets in a gesture reminiscent of his teenage years. Actually, yes, I replied, stepping aside to let him in. I could use someone to carry these supplies down to the beach. Where's Brooke? Taking a nap, he said, with the careful neutrality of someone navigating a minefield. The boat trip was challenging for her. I bit back a smile. I imagine it was. We worked together in companionable silence, loading a wagon with the necessities for the evening. As Bradley stacked firewood, he cleared his throat hesitantly. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. This whole weekend, the accommodations, the restaurant confusion, the whale watching, you planned all of it, didn't you? Down to the last detail. It wasn't really a question. I met his gaze steadily. Yes. Why? I mean, I understand being upset about the invasion, but this level of orchestration seems like something else entirely. I considered my answer carefully, wanting him to understand the deeper currents beneath my actions. Do you remember when you were about 8 and Harold decided to sell the piano without consulting me? Bradley frowned. Vaguely. You used to play in the evenings. Every evening, I corrected gently. It was how I decompressed after work, how I expressed the parts of myself that had no other outlet. I'd saved for years to buy that piano before I met your father, and one day I came home and it was gone. Harold had sold it because, in his words, we needed the space, and you hardly used it anyway. Understanding dawned in Bradley's eyes, and you never said anything. You just accepted it. I did, I nodded. Just as I accepted when he decided where we would vacation, what car I would drive, which friends were worth our time. Just as I accepted when you and Brooke canceled Christmas visits, or changed plans at the last minute, or made decisions about my grandchildren without considering my feelings. I never thought of it that way, he admitted quietly. Few people do, I replied without rancor. The accommodating ones become invisible after a while. We're taken for granted, our boundaries ignored, our desires forgotten. Until one day, something breaks. I gestured around us, at my cottage, my beach, my hard-won independence. This place represents everything I've fought for, Bradley. My dream, on my terms. When Brooke called with her demands, treating my home like a hotel she'd booked for her convenience, it was the piano all over again. Bradley was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. So the whole weekend has been, what? A lesson in respect? In consequences, I corrected. Every action creates ripples. When you make decisions that affect others without consulting them, when you prioritize your convenience over their boundaries, there are consequences. Sometimes they're immediate, sometimes they're delayed, but they always come eventually. He nodded slowly, like the Westfields respecting you more than Brooke, even after all her careful planning. Exactly. Authentic connection can't be scheduled or staged. It emerges naturally when people are genuine with each other. I touched his arm lightly. Something you used to understand instinctively, before the corporate world convinced you otherwise. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, we finished our preparations in thoughtful silence. I could almost see Bradley processing our conversation, re-evaluating not just this weekend, but perhaps the patterns of his marriage, his career, his life choices. By 6 o'clock, a respectable fire was crackling in the fire pit on my private stretch of beach. I had arranged driftwood logs in a circle for seating, softened with blankets and cushions, and set up a folding table with the makings for s'mores, hot dogs, and a pot of my chili warming over a camp stove. Simple, rustic, and genuinely inviting. Exactly what I had promised. The Westfields arrived first, having apparently embraced the casual dress code with enthusiasm. Diana wore jeans and a comfortable sweater, while Jonathan had donned a flannel shirt that made him look more like a retired fisherman than a real estate mogul. "This is wonderful," Diana exclaimed, surveying the setup with genuine appreciation. Just like the beach parties we used to have when the children were young, before everything became so formal. Bradley's colleagues from the firm appeared next, their numbers reduced to just 3 couples who had braved the entire weekend. They approached with the wary optimism of people who had survived the whale-watching expedition, and were now prepared for anything. Tiffany and Patrick arrived looking decidedly less polished than before, though Tiffany still managed to convey her discomfort through subtle grimaces at the rustic seating arrangements. Brooke and Bradley were the last to join us, emerging from the path that led from my cottage to the beach. Even in the fading light, I could see the tension in Brooke's posture, the tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had clearly made an effort to dress appropriately, jeans and a cashmere sweater, but the pristine state of both suggested they had been purchased specifically for this occasion rather than drawn from her regular wardrobe. "Dorothy," she greeted me with forced warmth, "this is charming." "Thank you," I replied simply. "Help yourself to food and drinks. We're keeping it casual tonight." As everyone settled around the fire, filling plates with chili and roasting hot dogs on sticks I had carefully whittled that afternoon, I observed the shifting dynamics with quiet satisfaction. The Westfields had positioned themselves near me, drawing Bradley into their conversation with genuine interest. Brooke hovered at the periphery, clearly unsure of her place in this unfamiliar social landscape where her usual tactics held no power. Dorothy was just telling us about her plans for a community reading program here on the beach during summer evenings, Diana said, seamlessly including me in the conversation. "What a wonderful idea! Literature and nature combined. Mom's always had a gift for bringing people together through books," Bradley commented, his voice warm with rediscovered pride. "Her story hours at the library were legendary when I was growing up." "Is that so?" Jonathan seemed genuinely interested. "What kinds of books resonated most with the community?" As I described my experiences connecting readers with just the right books at just the right moments in their lives, I noticed Brooke edging closer, her expression shifting from discomfort to something more complex, perhaps recognition that she was witnessing a side of her mother-in-law she had never bothered to see before. The evening deepened, stars appearing above us as the conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic. Stories were shared, laughter erupted frequently, and even the initially reluctant guests eventually relaxed into the simple pleasure of fire, food, and unhurried human connection. "Who wants to hear a ghost story?" I suggested, as the flames danced lower and the night grew darker. "I know all the local legends, including a few that never made it into the official town history." "Oh, yes!" Diana clapped her hands in delight. "I haven't heard a proper ghost story in years." I launched into the tale of the lighthouse keeper's daughter, a story with just enough historical truth to give weight to its supernatural elements. As I spoke, I observed my audience, the rapt attention of the Westfields, the grudging interest of Tiffany and Patrick, the surprised appreciation of Bradley's colleagues. Brooke alone remained detached, her focus seemingly elsewhere as she stared into the flames. When I concluded my story to appreciative murmurs and requests for another, Brooke suddenly stood. "I think I'll head back to the house," she announced, her voice tight. "It's been a long day." "I'll walk you," Bradley offered, rising to join her. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "Stay and enjoy the stories. I just need some quiet time." As she walked away, her rigid posture illuminated briefly by the firelight before disappearing into the darkness of the path. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy. It couldn't be easy watching your carefully constructed social facade crumble, your influence wane, your assumptions about power and status upended in the space of a weekend. But sympathy didn't equal regret. Some lessons came at a cost, and this one had been long overdue. "Another story, Dorothy?" Jonathan requested, drawing my attention back to the circle. I smiled, settling more comfortably on my driftwood seat. "This one is about second chances and unexpected treasures," I began, meeting Bradley's gaze across the fire. "It starts with a woman who thought her life was over, only to discover it was just beginning." As I wove my tale beneath the stars, with the ocean's eternal rhythm as accompaniment, I felt a sense of completion. The weekend wasn't over yet, but its purpose had been fulfilled. Messages had been received, boundaries established, perspectives shifted. Whatever came next would unfold on different terms, my terms, and that had been the point all along. Morning arrived with a clarity that only seems possible by the sea. Sharp blue sky, air so clean it almost hurt to breathe, and sunlight that transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. I woke early, as has been my habit since childhood, and made my way to the kitchen to start coffee. The house was quiet, Bradley and Brooke still asleep in the guest room after our late night around the fire. The bonfire had continued long after Brooke's departure, evolving into one of those rare, perfect gatherings where time seems suspended and connections deepen without effort. The Westfields had been the last to leave, Jonathan insisting on helping douse the fire, while Diana embraced me with genuine warmth. "This has been the most memorable weekend we've had in years," she had confided. "Thank you for your honesty, Dorothy. It's refreshingly rare in our circles." Now, as I carried my coffee to the deck, I contemplated the final act of my carefully orchestrated weekend. The impromptu guests would be departing today, returning to their various accommodations before heading back to Boston. The true test would be what remained after they left, what lessons had been absorbed, what boundaries established, what relationships recalibrated. The sliding door opened behind me and I turned, expecting Bradley. Instead, Brooke stood there, already dressed in slim jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look younger and strangely vulnerable. "May I join you?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "Of course," I gestured to the chair beside mine. "Coffee's fresh in the kitchen." She disappeared briefly, returning with a steaming mug to settle beside me. For several minutes we sat in silence, watching the waves and seagulls, the morning light painting everything in gentle gold. "I couldn't sleep," Brooke said finally, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I kept thinking about something Diana Westfield said to me last night before she left the bonfire." I waited, allowing her the space to continue. "She said, 'Your mother-in-law reminds me of myself 30 years ago, before I learned that control is an illusion, and the only real power comes from authenticity.'" Brooke's fingers tightened around her mug. "I've been trying to decide if it was a compliment or a criticism. Perhaps it was neither," I suggested. "Just an observation from someone who's traveled a path you're still navigating." She turned to look at me directly, her expression more open than I'd ever seen it. "This whole weekend, you planned everything, didn't you? The terrible accommodations, the restaurant mix-up, that hellish boat trip, it was all deliberate." "Yes," I admitted simply. To my surprise, she didn't erupt in anger or defensive accusations. Instead, a reluctant smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "It was impressive, meticulous actually. I didn't think you had it in you." "Most people don't," I acknowledged. "That's rather the point. You wanted to teach me a lesson." "It wasn't a question. I wanted to establish boundaries," I corrected gently, "to demonstrate that my home, my time, and my dignity are not commodities to be commandeered at your convenience." Brooke sipped her coffee, considering this. "You know, in my world, my professional world, respect is taken, not given. You identify what you want, you strategize how to get it, and you execute without hesitation or apology. It works, or at least, it has always worked for me." "And yet here we are," I observed, "with the Westfields connecting more authentically with me, the retired librarian in a modest beach cottage, than with you and your carefully orchestrated luxury experience." A flash of pain crossed her face, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. "Yes, here we are." Something in her voice, A note of resignation, perhaps, or genuine reflection, softened my approach. "Brooke, may I ask you something?" She nodded warily. "What did you hope to achieve this weekend? Beyond impressing the Westfields and Bradley's colleagues, what outcome were you seeking?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She stared into her coffee as if the answer might be found there. "Security," she said finally, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. "Bradley's position at the firm isn't as solid as everyone thinks. The Westfield account is make or break for his partnership track." This was new information, a glimpse behind the polished facade she typically presented. "I didn't know that. No one does. Bradley wouldn't want it known." She looked up, her expression unexpectedly vulnerable. "My parents struggled financially my entire childhood. My father's business failed twice. We moved constantly, always downsizing, always losing status. I swore I would never live that way as an adult." Understanding dawned, pieces clicking into place. So the designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the social climbing, insurance, she finished for me. If you have the right connections, wear the right clothes, live in the right neighborhood, you're protected. At least, that's what I've always believed. The admission hung between us, surprisingly honest for a woman who trafficked in carefully curated impressions. I found myself reassessing Brooke, seeing beyond the polished surface to the anxious child who had grown up equating status with safety. "Security is important," I acknowledged, "but it rarely comes from external validation, Brooke. True security, the kind that sustains you through life's inevitable challenges, comes from within, from knowing who you are and standing firmly in that truth, regardless of circumstances." She studied me thoughtfully. "Like you did when Harold dismissed your dream of a beach house, when he sold your piano?" So Bradley had shared our conversation. "Yes, though it took me far too long to learn that lesson. I don't want the same for you or for Bradley." "What do you mean?" I chose my next words carefully, aware that this moment of openness might be fleeting. "I see Bradley becoming what others expect of him rather than who he truly is. Just as I see you chasing external markers of success instead of discovering what would bring you genuine fulfillment. Both paths lead to the same destination. Waking up one day surrounded by all the trappings of the life you thought you wanted, only to realize it belongs to someone else entirely." Brooke was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the ocean. "I don't know how to be any other way," she admitted finally. "This is who I am, who I've had to be." "No," I said gently. "It's who you've chosen to be. There's a difference." The sliding door opened again, and Bradley emerged, looking rumpled and sleep-deprived, but somehow lighter than he had in years. "Morning," he mumbled, heading directly for the coffee pot visible through the kitchen window. Brooke and I exchanged a glance, not quite conspiratorial, but acknowledging the shift in dynamics our conversation had created. Something had changed between us, though whether it would last remained to be seen. When Bradley returned with his coffee, he settled into the third chair, completing our small circle. "So," he said after his first sip, "what's the plan for today?" "The Westfields texted," Brooke replied, her professional mask slipping back into place, though not quite as seamlessly as before. "They want to have a final brunch before heading back to the city. Jonathan suggested that little place by the harbor. He said the authentic local atmosphere appealed to him." I caught the slight emphasis she placed on authentic, the gentle self-mockery that suggested our conversation had not been entirely in vain. "That sounds perfect," Bradley agreed, looking between us with cautious optimism, clearly sensing a change, but uncertain of its nature or durability. As we sat together watching the morning unfold across the water, I felt an unexpected sense of hope. The weekend had accomplished what I'd intended, but perhaps in ways I hadn't anticipated. Boundaries had been established, yes, but bridges had also been tentatively extended. Not forgiveness, exactly, but the possibility of a new beginning based on clearer understanding. "Dorothy," Brooke said as we prepared to go inside, "I owe you an apology for this weekend and for other things as well." The words were clearly difficult for her, but no less genuine for the effort they required. "Apology accepted," I replied simply. "And perhaps we can both approach our relationship differently going forward." She nodded, a hint of respect in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I think I'd like that." As we rose to prepare for the day ahead, I took a final moment to appreciate the view that was now mine to enjoy every morning. This house, this beach, this hard-won independence, all symbols of the woman I had become after decades of accommodation and compromise. The irony wasn't lost on me that in defending these boundaries, I might have opened the door to a more authentic connection with my son and daughter-in-law than I'd ever thought possible. Whether that potential would be realized remained to be seen, but for the first time, it felt within reach. Some lessons come at a cost, but the most valuable ones are worth the price. As I followed Bradley and Brooke inside, I smiled to myself, thinking that perhaps the greatest surprise of my meticulously planned weekend of revenge had been the unexpected possibility of reconciliation. The final gathering at Harborview Cafe unfolded with an ease that would have seemed impossible just 3 days earlier. Our group had dwindled to just the essential players in our weekend drama: the Westfields, Bradley and Brooke, and myself, seated at a corner table overlooking the fishing boats, bobbing gently in the morning tide. The cafe was exactly the sort of place tourists often overlooked in favor of trendier establishments. Worn wooden floors, mismatched chairs, and a menu featuring simple fare prepared with decades of expertise. The owner, Maggie O'Brien, had been a regular at my library's book club for 15 years, and she greeted me with a warm hug before seating us at the best table in the house. "Dorothy's practically royalty around here," she informed our group with a wink. "First edition books are held for her at the bookshop. Fishermen save their best catch for her, and she never waits for a table at any restaurant in town." "Is that so?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow in my direction. The power of the local librarian extends far and wide, it seems. People underestimate the influence of someone who helped their children with school projects, found books to comfort them through grief, and never once judged their reading preferences, I replied with a small smile. The community takes care of its own. The conversation flowed naturally as we enjoyed Maggie's famous blueberry pancakes and freshly caught crab omelets. The Westfields shared stories of their early years building their business, when they'd lived in a studio apartment above one of their first renovation projects. Bradley spoke about his original passion for literature, which had been sidelined when practical considerations led him to business school instead. Most surprising was Brooke's participation. Quieter than her usual commanding presence, but genuine in a way I hadn't witnessed before. She listened more than she spoke, her usual need to control the narrative noticeably absent. When she did contribute, her comments were thoughtful rather than calculated for effect. As brunch wound down, Jonathan cleared his throat, assuming the air of someone about to make an official pronouncement. "I want to thank you all for a truly memorable weekend. Particularly you, Dorothy, for providing us with an experience we won't soon forget." I inclined my head in acknowledgement, wondering if he realized just how deliberately memorable I had made it. "We've decided to move forward with Bradley's proposal," he continued, "though with some modifications I'd like to discuss." He turned to Bradley. "Your approach to the adaptive reuse element of our Boston property shows genuine innovation, but I believe it would benefit from a more community-centered focus." Bradley leaned forward, clearly surprised but quickly engaged. "What are you envisioning? Something that honors the history of the neighborhood while creating spaces for genuine connection, perhaps incorporating a cultural center or educational component." Jonathan glanced at me. "Your mother's insights about community building through shared experiences have been illuminating." I saw the moment Bradley realized what was happening, that the Westfields had been more influenced by my authentic approach than by Brooke's carefully orchestrated impressions. To his credit, he adapted quickly, his genuine enthusiasm for the creative possibilities emerging as they discussed potential directions. Brooke remained unusually quiet during this exchange, her expression thoughtful rather than threatened. When Diana mentioned the need for the project to reflect authentic local culture rather than imported prestige, I saw Brooke nod slightly, as if acknowledging a truth she was only beginning to recognize. After the Westfields departed for Boston, promising to schedule a formal meeting the following week, the three of us lingered over coffee. The weekend was ending, but the reverberations would continue long after everyone returned to their regular lives. "So," Bradley began, breaking the contemplative silence, "that went differently than expected." "Indeed," I agreed mildly. "Jonathan basically redesigned our entire approach based on conversations with you around a bonfire," he continued, shaking his head in amazement. "Conversations about ghost stories and library programs. People connect through genuine experiences, Bradley, not staged ones." I glanced at Brooke, who was staring into her coffee cup with uncharacteristic introspection. "The Westfields have enough wealth and status in their daily lives. What they responded to was authenticity, something increasingly rare in their circles. "I've been approaching this all wrong," Brooke said suddenly, looking up. "Not just this weekend, but everything." She met my gaze directly. "I've been so focused on creating the perfect impression that I've missed what actually matters to people like the Westfields." "To most people," I corrected gently. "Connection isn't about impressing others, Brooke. It's about seeing them, truly seeing them, and allowing yourself to be seen in return." Bradley reached across the table to take my hand. "I'm sorry, Mom, for taking you for granted, for not standing up for your boundaries, for forgetting who you really are beneath the accommodating mother role I assigned you." "And I'm sorry too," Brooke added, the words clearly unfamiliar on her tongue, but no less sincere for their rarity. "For treating your home like a hotel, your time like a commodity, and your feelings like an inconvenience." I squeezed Bradley's hand, acknowledging Brooke with a nod. "Thank you both. That means a great deal to me." "So, where do we go from here?" Bradley asked, the question encompassing far more than just our immediate plans. "You two head back to Boston," I replied. "I have a house to settle into, books to unpack, and a community to reacquaint myself with." "And us?" Brooke gestured between herself and me. "Our relationship?" I considered her question carefully, aware that this moment would set the tone for whatever came next. "I think we start over, Brooke. Not forgetting what's happened, but agreeing to approach each other with more honesty and respect going forward." "I'd like that," she said quietly. "And perhaps next time you visit," I added with a small smile, "you might consider calling first and bringing fewer than 22 people." The tension broke as they both laughed, the sound carrying through the small cafe like a promise of better days ahead. As we walked back to my cottage for their final packing, I felt a curious lightness. The weekend had accomplished what I'd intended, though not exactly in the way I'd planned. My boundaries had been established, yes, but something unexpected had emerged alongside that victory, the foundation for a more authentic relationship with both my son and the woman he had chosen. "You know," Bradley said as we reached my front porch, "Dad would never have believed you capable of orchestrating this entire weekend. He always underestimated you." "Many people did," I replied without bitterness, "including myself for too long." "Not anymore," Brooke observed with newfound perception. "You know exactly who you are now." I smiled, taking in the view of my cottage with its blue shutters and the ocean beyond, the dream I had refused to relinquish despite years of dismissal and doubt. "Yes, I believe I do." After they departed, the house fell into a silence that felt not empty, but full of possibility. I moved through the rooms slowly, reclaiming each space as truly mine now that the weekend's invasion had concluded. In the guest room, I found a small package on the freshly made bed, wrapped in simple blue paper with a note in Bradley's handwriting, "For new beginnings." Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. Bradley, at about 5 years old, sitting on my lap as I read to him, both of us completely absorbed in the story. The image captured something essential about our relationship before external expectations and compromises had reshaped us both. Below the photo, Bradley had written, "To the woman who taught me the power of stories, boundaries, and second chances, I'm listening now." I placed the frame on my bedside table, where it would be the first thing I saw each morning and the last thing each night. Then I carried my favorite book and a cup of tea out to the deck, settling into what I now thought of as my chair to watch the afternoon light play across the water. The weekend's drama had concluded, but a new story was just beginning. One where Dorothy Sullivan was finally the author of her own life rather than a secondary character in someone else's narrative. As I opened my book, the ocean breeze gently turning the pages, I smiled at the perfect simplicity of this moment I had worked so hard to achieve. Some dreams take longer than others to realize. Some boundaries require dramatic defense before they're respected. And some of life's most important lessons arrive in unexpected packages, even in the form of 22 unwanted guests on the very first day of your hard-earned new beginning. But sitting there, surrounded by the tangible results of my perseverance, I couldn't help but think that the timing had been perfect after all. For what better way to claim my space in the world than by definitively showing others and myself exactly who Dorothy Sullivan had become? I raised my teacup in a private toast to the horizon. "To new chapters," I whispered. "May they be written entirely in my own hand."